I'm Steve Andrews, and I'm here from skybreeddisc.com and from ultiworlddiscgolf.com. I'm a writer there. And what I like to talk about today is part of our short game seminar, working on how we make our short game stronger. We build it from the basket backwards to really make and improve our game. So what we want to talk about today is putting. Lots of people say to just go out and putt and learn how to putt and practice your putt and get your putt consistent by doing lots of reps. And that's good advice. But there's also things you can change to make your putt more consistent so that what you're practicing has more likely a chance to work. I wrote an article about this, and to build off that article, I want to talk about the three main levers. There are a few other things to talk about, but three main levers to think about as you build your putt to understand how to putt better, how to putt more consistency, or to add power to it, depending on what you need. The first of those levers that really helps is the wrist. Right? How do we use our wrist in the putt to get the disc to go into the basket, to get enough power to get to the disc, but enough control to make sure that it stays consistent? I want you to think about where you put your wrist, where you put your hand on the disc, right? So anywhere, most of the disc where we're gonna hold it, go anywhere from about 3 o'clock here, so this is about 3 o'clock here, to about noon, right? So as you can see, as you move your wrist around, you begin to get more of a flex in your wrist, right? And that's gonna produce power. As you move it this way, you're taking wrist out of it, and you're gonna add consistency because you don't have to time the release of your wrist, but you're gonna have less power because the wrist is really a source of power. So if you see, watch as these putts, I'm gonna throw a number of putts here and watch how they will. If you have it here, right, you're gonna get a very easy, consistent release, right? You're gonna come out and it's gonna go right towards the center in a very easy way, right? If you instead change it and move the wrist around to the top, and again, it doesn't matter where you have it, where you start, it's when you're gonna take your downswing, right? So if you have it here at 3 o'clock, but then you turn it here, you have it at noon, right? So you have it at 12. But if you move up to here, you're gonna get a lot more power on this shot. Now, you're gonna get a lot more power, but you're gonna lose some accuracy. So you have the wrist, right? Depending on whether it's here, you're gonna get a little more consistency. So if you're hitting, if you're getting it in the right place very consistently, that's really gonna help. But you can see if you move back a little bit, right? So this is gonna be real consistent. You're gonna get a nice, easy release. But if you move back just a little bit further, you're gonna find it falling short. So you've gotta find more power. More of a spin release is gonna get a lot of power, but you might need more control. So where do you find those other levers? Well, the other levers, one of them is gonna be the elbow. And you'll notice that there are different golfers who putt different ways, right? So Paul McBeth has a bent elbow. It's a big source of power, is that elbow extending. Someone like Ricky Wysocki has a really straight elbow, and a straight elbow is going to produce a lot more consistent. It's going to be easier to hit your release point over and over again if you have a straight elbow, but you're going to lose power. So you've got to balance these things, right? So the first one is the wrist. Where do you want to have it here? If you notice yourself when you're out and you're actually out on the course, particularly under pressure, if you tend to have a high spin position, and you tend to lose it left or right or high, particularly left and right, when you're under pressure, you might find some success if you just dial that back. Even moving it just a little bit more to about 130, where a lot of people have it, right? Instead of 3 or noon, 130, you get some wrist release, you get some spin, but you still get better control, right? So then you can have an elbow. If you want to have a straight elbow to hit your release point easier, you're going to need to find power. And that final source of power is going to be your body. And there's a couple of different ways that golfers do it, right? So there is what I like to say a hinge, or there's a pop, or there's a shift. The first is the hinge, and a lot of straddle putters use a hinge, right? So this is Kevin Jones or Greg Barsby, that when they putt, you'll notice that their body they bend forward and then come up, like that, right? So that's kind of a hinge. There's also, if you see, there are some straddle putters who use more of a pop, that rather than a hinging action, they go down and up. Nate Sexton tends to do this when he's doing a straddle putt, right? So he'll be here and there, like that. And then the final one is a weight shift, right? So this is, Paul McBeth has a weight shift. So he'll be from here, his back heel is up, so his weight is back here, and then he just takes the weight forward to get his shot. So that's one way to generate power, but as you're generating more power from here, if you also have a spin position, so you have a lot of power from a spin and a bent arm and a weight shift, it's going to require more practice to stay consistent. Now, a player like Ricky Wysocki mixes and matches. So the last one, because he has a relatively moderate spin position, he's not in a high spin position, and a straight arm, he uses a very big weight shift to get the amount of power to make his long putts, right? His relatively low spin hand position with a straight arm position means that he's going to be very accurate at hitting his release point. But he needs to make up for that loss of power somehow. And he makes up with it with a very big weight shift, right? So Ricky Wysocki, you can see his front toe is up, is going to be putting like that, right? He's going to be a very big movement. So you can mix and match these in different ways, right? So Kevin Jones has a high spin position on his wrist, but he has a very straight arm and a body position that his arm is basically a hinge. So he's going to be putting like that. So he's going to have a lot of consistency from his arm position is in one plane. He's going to have a high spin position, but he makes up for that by having a body position that makes it very easy for him to hit the target. But what he needs to do is to have a big body hinge to make up for the lack of power that he doesn't have when he throws. When you're building your putt, think of mixing and matching these things, right? So you can have, if your problem is that you don't get enough to get to the basket, but your consistencies, then you can go ahead and have a high spin position and you'll be able to throw it fairly easily, right? So if you look at Calvin Heimberg, very spin position, almost uses no body. Now he's very tall and has long levers, a bent elbow, and he throws it that way, right? So you can look at how people combine these things, right? So the elbow can sometimes is just in and out, which is pretty consistent. And if you look at someone like Chris Dickerson, right, has relatively little spin here, but has a very much of a action in one plane that his elbow is really doing a lot of the work to putt that way. Or if you look at someone like Matty O. Matty O has also a very spin putt with an Anheuser angle and throws that way, right? So he's very much in one line. So you can combine these things. The major one is if you don't get to play very much, because the spin release, meaning you're around here at this upper position in noon, requires a lot of practice to get it consistent. And so if you find yourself as a player not able to consistently hit that release point, think about rolling your wrist, maybe not all the way to 3 o'clock, but to 1:30, which would make it easier to hit that while still keeping some spin. If you find yourself inconsistent, you can go try a straighter elbow, take that joint out and do more of an elbow shoulder hinge to get more consistent on that release angle. Or if you're falling short, right, if you have a release you like, but you fall short, don't change all of it, just get a slightly bigger weight shift, whether that is more of a hinge or a bigger shift from back to front, all kinds of ways to add power. So realize that in each of these things, there are actions that can add power and more spin by moving your wrist, or by adding body, or by taking out or adding these levers of your shoulder and elbow, right? So there's all kinds of ways that you can build a putt that then you can know that when you go and practice it, it is doing what you need it to do. You can have a putt that's more consistent so that when you practice, you're practicing something that's gonna have a higher percentage of making the shots you need to make. So combine those ways in the ways you want, and you can notice if you begin to think about these things, how you can see pro players who have mixed and matched the different levers that they use to add a mix of power and consistency. Thanks so much.